Welcome to Around the Writer's Table, a podcast focusing on the crossroads of creativity, craft, and conscious living for writers of all ages and backgrounds. Your hosts are Gina, Melody, and KimBoo, three close friends and women of a certain age who bring to the table their eclectic backgrounds and unique perspectives on the trials, tribulations, and the joys of writing. So pull up a chair and get comfortable here around the writer's table.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 6 of Around the Writer's Table. We're going to be talking today about keeping the summer fires burning. I am one of your co-hosts, Gina Edwards. I am passionate about supporting women and finding their voices on the page and from a stage. Also with me here today are my buddies KimBoo. KimBoo is a romance novelist and former project manager who helps writers and small business owners like me find time and mojo and motivation to create. Hello, KimBoo.
Hello.
And I am also here with my bud, Melody. Melody helps her clients find their sense of home by restoring balance and harmony to their lives through plant spirit medicine and her book, Soul of the Seasons. Hi, Melody.
Hi, Gina. Hi, KimBoo.
Hello.
Great to be here today. So, Melody, why don't you give us a little brief on the 5 seasons? This episode is part of an ongoing series that we are doing that is centered around many of the concepts in your book. So I'm going to pass it off to you to kind of fill in our listeners on what we've done so far and where we are.
Thank you, Gina. And I would invite our listeners, if you haven't already, to go back and listen to our earlier podcast because we go through some of these in more detail. But I'm just going to provide this brief overview. And this is in relationship to the writing process. And so we talked last month, maybe that was actually 2 months ago, we talked about spring.
Time
Oh my gosh.
flies. Woo.
Yeah, in the season of spring and about all the explosive new growth that happens in spring. And that's when we start our first draft and we get all these exciting ideas popping and our storyline is all, we make notes and we write like crazy people. And this is where our vision for our work comes into being and more focus. Then we move on to the season of summer. Spring always gives away to summer, which is the season we're going to talk about today. And summer is the season of maturation. After our season of explosive new growth, our story needs help to mature. And so now we need to shape and structure our story idea. And we need to be aware that if we're not careful to support our little seedling story idea, it may wither and die. And we're going to talk more about that, keeping up the spark in summer. And summer is when the visions we had created in spring are brought into fruition. They're put on, the words are put on the page, the storyline develops, our characters tell us crazy and wonderful things. And we're overseeing that process, which may seem hectic and chaotic at times, but a lot is going on during the season of summer. So after we get the season of summer, we move through that. Our next season, in 5 element anyway, is a season of harvest. Some call this Indian summer. This is a brief but sumptuous season where we experience and recognize all the fruits of our hard work. We may have completed our first draft and we have that printed out before us, or second draft, or fourth draft, or fifth draft, but we have something to show for all our hard work. And It feels complete, and we feel gratitude, and our heart is full. After the season of summer and harvest comes fall, of course. And fall is a season, as it implies, is a season of letting go. So this is where we're going to. That's where we put our editor hat on, and maybe literally hire an editor to help us come and take a look at what needs to be pruned and what needs to be cut back and how to shape it and move it forward in keeping with our vision. And after our season of fall comes winter, and that's a season of rest. That is the quiet, that's the womb of consciousness. It's where our creativity sparks. It's where those little seedling ideas of story start to germinate. And
I
it's
love winter so
also
much.
me.
I love winter.
Yeah,
Not just the weather, but this whole idea, like the sparking and and the
yeah.
ideas come.
And
Yeah.
a season of rest as well. So that's an
Mm,
overview of the 5 seasons. And as you follow us along, we're going to talk more in depth about some of the joys and challenges of each of these seasons.
Melody, one of the things that we've talked about numerous times, and I always like to reiterate for the listeners who may not be familiar with plant spirit medicine and the idea of the seasons as we're presenting them, is that we're not talking about an alignment of the writing process and our creativity with the actual natural seasons of the environment. We're using this as a model, and that,
mm.
we may creatively be in a season of winter when outside it's 90 degrees. I just want the readers to understand that this is a model that we're using to help them understand the creative cycles.
Exactly. Everything has a season. And it's
Everything.
important. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Our work, our relationships, life, everything has a season, a beginning, and cycling around again. It is important to remember that when balanced, all of the seasons are working at all times. We may be focused in one particular area at one time or another. And we're going to talk about summer this time, but each season is supported and reinforced by the other seasons. So we like to have this very linear thought process, but thinking of it as something that's always in motion, always cycling around, always supportive. So, what are some of the common pitfalls that we run into during this season? Well, as we touched on briefly, it can be easy because there's so much going on. This is where we're down in the trenches now with our project. We may have pounded off out a rough first draft or the outline, or gotten off to a fantastic start, but then we get down in the trenches, and we may feel ourselves waning. I know this happens with me. I like shiny things. Ooh, new story idea. Yay. And during the writing of that, my creative brain is just sparking on all cylinders all the time. I get new story ideas, or I get lots of ideas for my character, and then it's so much that my brain can shut down. I can become overwhelmed. Um, Things get muddled. I can't understand what's my plot need to do. Maybe it becomes too complex or confusing or poorly structured. I feel disorganized. And then I
I
lose.
have no idea what that feels like.
I'm glad y'all have graduated beyond that, because I'm gonna be asking you how you did that.
I was actually, while you're talking, I was thinking of a conversation I had with my friend yesterday, a friend of mine who's a fan fiction writer as well as trying to break into doing her own original genre fiction. And we called it the 2 chapter problem, because it's when you have a great idea and you're writing it down and you get 2 chapters in, and then like you said, it either becomes overwhelming or it kind of peters out, or you're not sure where you're supposed to go with it. And so you have like your life is littered with 2 chapters of books of all these different books that you have around you, and it's the 2 chapter problem. That's the name we came up with it
And
yesterday.
don't you think too that that's related to something that we talked about? I don't know if it was the last episode or the one before about too many options, too many
Yeah,
choices.
yep,
Creative
yep.
people come up
Decision
with
fatigue.
so many ideas. Yeah, and then we've got
Yeah.
decisions to make, and we've got to pick one sometimes, and we think that there's a right or wrong, and there's not. It's creativity. You can go where you want to with it.
Yeah. And oftentimes I try to cope with this by either, becoming the severe task mistress and, working on it, pounding on it all the time, all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you can attest. That works so well with me. Not. Um, and
I'm sensing
I,
a bit of sarcasm there, just a little.
yeah, just a little. So I lose my passion or discard it altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, tell me a little bit, Gina, about your experience during this season of the writing process, some of your challenges and some of your your joys.
What you said.
Well, that was a great podcast, y'all. It's been good. Okay, now we're done.
um, no, seriously, you touched on a number of different ways, and I think it kind of depends on how far along my project is and maybe what kind of project that it is. And of course, my level of passion about it. But I can get to a place sometimes where I'm either overwhelmed because I have too many ideas, and then I have to sort of draw back, remind myself that there are no wrong decisions in a creative process, and then regroup. Sometimes I just feel like I have no ideas, like there's a blank wall, like, you know, and I honestly believe that it is the overwhelm of idea that leads me to the conclusion that I have no ideas, which sounds crazy, but it's almost like a
No.
shutdown process.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I just go, okay, I can't let anything through because there's just too much, too much, too much. And so I may shut down for a while, and that's when I know that I need to take a break from my writing and do something different. Maybe, again, depending on the project and the nature of it, it might just be going for a walk and then coming back to it a few hours later, or it might be putting that thing in the drawer and leaving it alone for a month and doing something completely different. It might be a creative crossover where I do something like, draw for a while or read for a while instead of writing. So it kind of just depends on the type of project that I'm working on, I think.
Oh, those are great ideas. And
Yeah, I think the creativity cross pollination is a really good one
Mm-hmm.
too. Because
yeah,
like if you're creatively stalled in one area, I often find if I work on a different story, or like you said, do some drawing or just even get up and dance, there's
Yes.
there's the energy there that can feed into helping resolve those issues.
Yeah, I think we don't
uh,
give enough credence to doing that creative crossover, and we don't give enough credit to what moving our body can do for us, can do for our mind,
absolutely.
can do for our creative process. So I'm glad that you mentioned dancing, and I think that's also a reason why I like walking so much, is because it gets me out of my head for a while and gets my body moving. And as we say in the Women Speak program that I do, our greatest wisdom as women is in our bodies. And so sometimes when we can get out of our heads and just move, then we come back to settle. What we need comes back to us.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Totally
It's a
agree with that.
great point. I found that to be true with myself too. I mean, I mentioned this before, but one of the most valuable pieces of helpful information you gave me as my editor when I was writing my book was take a break. A, give yourself credit for the work that you've done, and
Mm-hmm.
B, take a break from it. And it
Yes.
was so helpful. Can't tell you how many times when I've put something down completely, gone on and done something else totally unrelated, that resolution pops up
Mhm.
and I can find a way out.
I think if we're in that place of overwhelm or stuckness, whatever, however it manifests for you individually, if we can just remind ourselves to first say, look at all you've done so far. Just remind yourself of where you've come to that point. Give yourself a little bit of credit before you spin
Absolutely.
out.
Absolutely. So, KimBoo, tell us a little bit about how you navigate the season of summer in your writing projects and anything you found to help you.
Like I was discussing earlier, the two chapter problem is a big issue for me. I'm usually at the 30,000 word point. I hit a wall, and that's something that's been true most of my entire life. And so at that point, it's in the past I really have just put things aside, been overwhelmed. And I kind of want to bring up the topic of fear here.
Mhm.
I been dealing with that lately. A book that it's all Gina's fault. She recommended The Imposter Cure, a book about imposter syndrome, and it talks a lot about fear and perfectionism and issues like that. And when I come into, as we're talking about this season of summer where I'm, you know, uh, trying to help my stories mature and trying to bring that energy back into the stories to get out of the two chapter problem. Fighting the fear or dealing with the fear is a big one for me. I was kind of laughing when you said, Gina, about, look at what you've done, look at the successes you've had. And sometimes that's really helpful. And sometimes I look at it and I go, well, I've done it. Now I'll never be able to do it again. You know, It's just-
Oh
right?
no.
I know it's terrible. It's like, oh yeah, you took the shot. Now it's over, which is
Wrong.
absolutely not true. Yeah, wrong, because creativity is the seasons. It does come, it waxes and wanes, it comes and goes, but it
Hmm.
is eternal. It is always moving through us. So of course, obviously, that's not true. But dealing with that fear when I come up against that need to work on and really build the stories and build them up and make them stronger and make them complete. That's an important part of the process. I deal with the fear a lot. So I know you asked me what do I do? What are my solutions? And I can't say that this is an ongoing project for me, because as much as I've written, I have 7 novels published at this point, and 20 more in development, as is my way. Which Gina's
Crazy
always like,
woman.
I know, right? But that's how my brain works. I need lots of different things going on, to keep the creativity sparked. But dealing with that fear is really an ongoing issue. So I wish I could offer our listeners some trites packed solution that works really well for me. But sometimes it really is an issue of either laying off myself or pushing through. It just really depends on what the status is. And I'm sorry that that's just as convoluted and not helpful as it sounds. But as you
It,
guys were talking, I was really realizing just how big of an issue this is for me personally.
It's real though.
yeah, you
And
are
I'm
not
sure that if
alone.
you struggle with it, you are not the only one. Um, and
Absolutely.
I do have one thing to add, but I'm going to turn the question around on Melody and ask her the same thing. So what are your processes and what do you do?
Well, I didn't realize how much of a problem this was uh, um, with my writing until I did my book. I started my book. And because most of it was like I wrote and I enjoyed it. And, I just think I got bored with it or it didn't suit me or it really wasn't. And I just put it aside and didn't go back to it. But the the idea for the book grabbed me with such a vengeance. It would not let me go. I tried to put it down. I tried to stick it in a drawer and, you know, go away and move away and cross the US, and it just kept pulling me back. And the fears you were talking about, KimBoo, came up in full force. And we're going to talk about that more in the season of winter, because the season of winter is about death and the emotion of fear. And it, like anything, it serves us. It helps us become aware of taking appropriate risks, what we need to do. But getting overwhelmed by fear, as we know, that element is water in winter. Here we are in some season of summer with fire and your passion and joy and excitement. Um, Too much water on the fire puts it out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm. Mm-hmm.
learning about, I would say the number one thing that's helped me so much is learning my own seasons internally
Mm.
and trying to define, be clear on what it was I needed at the time. And then, drum roll, ask for it.
Oh,
Ask for it. Mm-hmm.
ask
Ask
for
for
it.
it from
Mm.
my fellow writers and from my community. And
Yes.
community is one way that I have found to be tried and true as a way to get me off the, you know, fence or trench
That is
or rut.
that is
The fence of
precisely
the
the
trance.
thing that I was going to add to this conversation. I'm so glad that you have gone there, Melody, because especially in the last months of the three of us getting together and talking about our writing process and ideating about this podcast and just sharing what we are going through in our writing process and creativity, just having that community, having that support system really ignites my fire. It really sets me going again when I feel like I have fallen off that fence.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree wholeheartedly. It helps get me
Absolutely.
perspective and balance, and I can bring that big ball of mess that I have to my trusted friends and community, and I don't know what to do with this crap. And they always help me look at it from a different perspective. They pull these little threads out and give me ideas of how to resolve it. They don't try to fix it for me, but they support me in getting some clarity. And another thing I love about community is they provide accountability for me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is really a big motivator for me. If I say I'm going to do something for you or something by XYZ, I generally follow through on it. There's a good
It's
likelihood.
interesting that you say that because as you're talking, and I know that we have we do. I mean, just I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag to our listeners that we do actually outline these podcasts a little bit. It's not completely off the cuff. And one of the things that we were gonna put in there is a little bit about the fan fiction community that I'm a part of. And one of the things that your comment about uh, accountability that really struck me just then is that there are a lot of situations in the fan fiction community and in fandoms where they create challenges. They create writing challenges. If anybody's familiar who's listening with NaNoWriMo, which is the annual National Write a Novel in a Month
Mhm.
thing that goes on that's held every year in November. It's like a mini version of that for particular fandoms. Like people will say, we're going to have, they're called Big Bangs. And a Big Bang challenge is usually where you commit to writing a story that's at least 100,000 words long. And it is in that fandom, and there's a due date for it. And they'll have a whole framework and a structure. There'll be check in times, there'll be people who will serve as beta readers or editors for you. There are people who are actually assigned the role of cheerleader who will come into communications on Discord or on forums and be like,
Cool.
hey, let me cheer you on and give you some mojo and juice, or let's bat around some ideas. And it's a community of accountability, but it's so positive and it's so encouraging. And I think a lot of times people think, accountability is a drudgery. Accountability
Hmm.
is something, a deadline. Oh my God, dead. The word dead is actually in the phrase. It's like, oh no, it's going to kill me. But when we have a trusted group of people, whether it's because we're in the same fandom or because we're good friends, as the three of us are, that accountability can be joyous. It can
Yes.
be it can be something that's positive and encouraging, and like a Big Bang challenge. That's not easy. That's not easy to write like 100,000 words in 6 months or whatever
Oh my God,
in
no.
for those stories. But the community is just coming together and creating that energy, and that is so important to tap into that wherever you can find it. I think it's like you said, Gina, this for us three, our bigger groups, our other groups. I know you've got some in Women Writing for Change, Gina, which is your Facebook group for women writers. That's so important. It's just really important.
I love that fun approach that the fanfic community is taking to that. That sounds awesome.
Oh, it
Um,
is. They're great.
I think a lot of people think in terms of getting feedback from their writing, the standard go to is, oh, I need to be in a critique group.
Hmm.
And I think that over the years, people are finding alternatives to that because, not every critique group is necessarily supportive. And you have to be careful
Mhm.
who you share with.
That
And
is so
that's
true.
something I know we're going to talk more about over the course of this podcast and maybe even devote an entire episode to that at some point. But um, feedback groups, critique groups, whatever you want to call them, just making sure that you're in a community that is supportive and uplifting instead of one that, drags you down or hijacks your stories or whatever. Um,
Hmm.
the Women Writing for Change group that you mentioned, KimBoo, before the pandemic started, it had nothing to do with the pandemic. Just coincidentally, I started that Facebook group in March of 2020. So, yeah, 2 years ago. And
Right on
one
the
of the,
nose of the pandemic, right? Yeah.
yes, yes. And one of the reasons that I started it is because a lot of women struggle to find the community. A lot of women either, they live in a remote place and so they may not have a supportive writing community like we're lucky to have here in North Florida. They may just not have any other writers in their circle of community who can give them the kind of support that writers need. And so, my thinking in creating the Women Writing for Change Facebook group was to bring women from all over the world together to give each other support. And we do Zoom writing sessions that are, as far as accountability goes, your point is well taken, Kimbu, that a lot of people think of accountability as this oppressive thing, this, I'm going to come down on you and you're going to punish you if you don't get to it. Well, that,
Naughty, naughty, naughty. Yeah.
Like discipline.
there's a whole spectrum of accountability, and we do that in, I think, a kind and very mindful way in terms of showing up, declaring what you're going to write. Now, this is all done on Zoom, declaring what you're going to write. We set a timer for an hour. We write for an hour, and afterwards, you do just a quick check in of how'd it go for you. And usually, we'll end up in some conversation about some aspect of writing or creativity or one of the struggles that one of the women have. But that sort of knowing that there are other women there at the same time doing the same thing that you're doing and yet working independently on their own projects, to me that is one of the most beautiful kinds of accountability.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Having
as,
been a part of those writing sessions,
mhm,
I would agree. It's
yeah,
very
absolutely.
enriching in a lot of ways to have that sense of community, even if we're all just being quiet and
Yeah.
typing or scribbling away.
Right.
Mhm.
Because writing is a very solitary activity. It can be good to come out of our heads and share with each other in one um, and tell our stories. We're going to talk about storytelling here in a minute. I really enjoyed the Women Writing for Change community. Even if I can't get to each of the sessions, I know I can drop in and be fed, and I'm there and present and ready for writing. where left to my own devices, I would be, cleaning my junk drawer out or something else equally uh, important. But I have to say, one of the payoffs for me with accountability is that sense of accomplishment when I can
Mm-hmm.
say to others, I got this done this week, where I was able to do this part of it, and I always get um, the support and the kudos from the group,
Mm.
and that's important. Usually didn't think how important that cheerleading, that group, that your community behind you, cheering you on and reminding you're on the right track.
I think in the past I've mentioned the Whip Wednesdays hashtag on Twitter, that a lot of where Whip stands for works in progress, where people take screenshots or post snippets of the work that they're currently writing. And one of the things I love about that is it's, in a way, it is this kind of positive accountability. It's like, oh yeah, I did write some. I'm on chapter 3. Here's a paragraph completely out of context. I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but here's a paragraph that shows that I've been writing. And, people are like, oh gosh, can't wait to read it. And wow, this looks
Mm-hmm.
so awesome. And oh, the mystery deepens, or whatever. And it's just, it's so enriching and uplifting. Original fiction writers have a little bit more trouble with that because people reading it don't know your characters. But I do know original fiction writers who do that. Their fans love to see a little snippet of what's coming up, and so that it's just such a positive feedback loop of
Mm-hmm.
that kind of group accountability type of thing.
It is absolutely, and the group has connected the individuals within it who might not have normally any other circumstances met, and developed relationships and outside the group. And to me, that's also important to have your
Yes.
trusted relationships, because as you all know, what goes on in our personal lives affects our creativity. I got a family issue looming over me, or something that's just seems to be too big for my plate. I can come to my good trusted friends, and they'll let me talk it out and maybe give me some perspective, because I don't know about you guys, but well, I do know about you guys, but it clogs my brain up. There is no creativity. There's no writing when I have a big issue hanging over me. Some people escape
Mm-hmm.
into it and do that, but I am not one of those people.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I know I have one friend that writing is her escape. That allows her to get away from all of the craziness that might be going on in the world in general, or if she's got something going on in her personal life, then her writing is her escape. But I'm like you, Melody. If I've got something that that's bothering me, that I'm concerned about, that's really, taking up space in my personal life in a way that doesn't feel good, then it's really hard for me to immerse myself in the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And so having those friends that we can share with, so that we can either work it out for ourselves, or at least just get it out, sometimes unblocks the block, opens the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that actually brings up one of the other qualities of summer that is so central um, to what we do, and that is communication, because community is all about communication, and also communicating what we know we need and desire at the time. And one of the ways we do that is through storytelling. So, storytelling is at the core of why people write. We want to tell our stories. We want to tell a story. We want to create a fabulous, crazy, wild, exciting, dark, funny story. And I, I love storytelling. That's in my DNA. My father was a great storyteller, loved to regale us with stories of his army days and his buddies and their antics. So genetically, I have that, and I love hearing stories and I love reading about stories. So Where does storytelling, where did that germ of storytelling fall or come into play or maybe become aware to you, uh, either of you? KimBoo?
Um, well, kind of like with you, it's part of my genetics. You know, my father, both of my parents are Southerners, and the South has a real strong tradition of of storytelling. My father, particularly, was is Appalachian, from the Highlands of Virginia. He was like your father. I could tell a great yarn. I mean, his stories about World War II, an absolutely tragic and horrifying time in his life, were hysterically funny. Just like, I don't know how he did it, but he did. I'm not as good a storyteller as he is. Probably I could be if I practice, but he was fantastic. So for me, the germ of the storytelling, I think, came from both of my parents in the sense that they were both readers and writers of their own styles and just really, really loved it. So for me, this is kind of a fruition of that potential in me. I'll be honest with you, like some people grow up thinking they're going to be doctors and then they go to medical school and they become doctors, and I grew up thinking I was going to be a writer. Like there was never any question in my mind. I'm not one of those people who stumbled over it later in life. Like it was absolutely 6 years old. I was going to be a writer, and that's just everything else circled around that, and always has.
I envy that because I too, when I was young, always thought that I would be a writer, and then life got in the way. And I postponed my writing until I was in my early 30s.
Mm,
But that's another story. Something that I think is interesting here is how each one of us has been influenced by our father's storytelling.
mm-hmm.
My father, too, is an incredible storyteller, and the listeners got to hear his voice in the intro of our podcast. That's my pop doing the
Yeah.
intro and the out for our podcast. Uh,
And he has his
he
own podcast now, right?
he does. He does. He and his buddy Randy have started Hot Mic with Hogan and Houston. And I'm so glad because he was a decades long, more than 50 years in radio. He started in radio before he was 16 years old and spent his life talking on the radio, telling stories, experiencing life in a way that uh, is very unusual and rich. And the way that he tells stories with his ability to create visual and to bring about emotion, I think is such a gift, such a gift. And like you, KimBoo, I don't feel like I can tell stories as well as he can. He's a verbal storyteller. I've tried to get him to
Mm-hmm.
write, and he has done some writing, but he really enjoys sharing his stories verbally. And I think that one of the powers of storytelling is that we can tell stories that can change the world literally. We can change people's minds, we can open them up to perspectives that they may never have even considered before when we tell stories, whether they're our stories in terms of being about us and our lives, or whether they're stories we have made up. Stories still have the power to change people, to change lives, and to change the world. And when it comes to storytelling, um, there's just there's so much richness there. I think that's a whole nother podcast too. I could go off on a
Oh
on a
my
million
God.
different tangents.
I'll
um,
make a note for us to do one later.
yeah, I do want to get back to the idea though of, as a storyteller, as a writer, knowing what you need and then being able to ask for it. That's something that
Mm,
Melody mentioned earlier. And it takes a lot of self-awareness to really understand what we need in terms of our creativity and our writing. And I think that there's a lot that can be said there too. But storytelling is obviously integral to all of us as writers, and something that I feel privileged to be able to tell stories.
That passion for that led you to something that got me excited and I became involved with, and that is the Women's Speak program. So that's women telling their stories, learning how to do verbal storytelling. Can you give us just a little brief overview of what Women Speak does?
Sure, sure. The way that I like to describe women speak is that, first of all, it's very feminine centric. It is on the surface a public speaking program, but it is not a Toastmasters or one of the traditional type programs because of its emphasis on the way that women think and the way that women just are in the world. We do connect deeply with our inner wisdom through body movement. Um, we learn all kinds of physical technique. We always have what we call a speaking practice every month that we focus on in terms of how to use your body when you're storytelling. And then we have a theme. And some of those themes are things like how to speak up in groups,
Hmm.
um, stories from your past. That's the next topic that we're going to be touching on this next month. Um, and sharing what you believe, understanding what it is that really moves you to want to change the world, and whether that's the world at large or whether that's the world being your community, your family, your closer knit world. Really knowing what those things are so that you can articulate them in a way to to bring about change and to create a vision that you really see a future possibility for.
I have to tell you that as someone who's done a lot of speaking for a lot of my adult life, I got excited about it because um, it really does such an amazing job at helping me hone in what I the message I want to deliver. We have time frames because if you're trying to pitch an idea like your story, like your book, whatever, you need to hone in on what it is that you are offering and do it in a relatively short period of time. And Women Speak has
Mm-hmm.
really helped me focus, and we weave our stories into that delivery in ways that are engaging to our audience. So I would go check it out. If there's going to be a link, or if there's not already a link, there should be on our webpage. I also wanted to say, if we don't have one, let's put a link on aroundthewriterstable.com for Gina, your dad's podcast, because I know
Oh, good idea.
our
Yeah,
our
Yeah, I'll
listeners would
definitely
you'll love
include
that.
that. Yeah, I'll definitely include
yeah.
that on the show notes when we get this one put up. For
Fabulous.
sure. For sure.
So
And I just, I kind of wanted, because I'm not in the Women's Speak program. I remember Gina, you going through the training for it and then launching your own thing. But it's such a great match to your Women Writing for Change, about encouraging women to speak up, to invite change into other people's lives through their stories and through their own life, through their own story. And it really has affected me kind of like tangentially, like off to the
Mm.
side, me just kind of looking at you doing these things, because it, as a genre writer, like we often get, besmirched as, being fluffy, unimportant writing. But I do think that, the conversations we've had about this, and with you, Melody, about, the call to writing and the process of writing through the seasons, has made me realize that I do have messages I want to share. One of my books, and I was thinking about this as I was going back and republishing some of my older books, and one is a love story about a widower and the grief that he has for the loss of his partner. And I realized that I was using that story to not necessarily process my own grief, but to share my experiences of grief, and how just because you lose somebody you love doesn't mean you'll never love again.
Mm.
That's a really important message that I didn't even see in the book until I came back after some of these discussions and your exposure to women writing for change, and me thinking, well, do my books have a message? Is there anything important here? So sometimes we do write those stories, even if we're not realizing it. So to me, it's been very valuable to come back and realize that my voice and my stories are in my stories, even if my stories aren't, the traditional self-help or the traditional high literary, whatever
Hmm.
schmoochy thing that I'm just totally not that person. Um, and that's been very valuable to me.
That's what I like about you, KimBoo.
I'm sitting here like I can't even sit still in my seat because what you just said makes me so excited because again, that's another reason why I really wanted to get Women Writing for Change started and start getting these women together because whether our stories are make believe, whether they're made up, or whether they're, a self-help book or a memoir, whether they're true or whether they're fantasy, it does not matter the genre, it does not matter the type of book that it is. That author had some driving force, whether it was apparent to them or not, had some driving force in putting forth that message, in sharing that story. And
Mm-hmm.
so, that awareness may not be on the surface and might come after the writing is already done. But, storytelling, like I said, it can change lives, and understanding what those messages are that we have in our stories, whether they're intentional or not, whether they're overt or, more subtle, I think is very valuable for a writer.
Has been for me for
Absolutely.
sure.
And I didn't want to get away without mentioning uh, the things you do to not only tell your stories, KimBoo, but to support the writer through the Author Alchemist, the courses you're offering. You're starting a new course that's very exciting. I've only heard a little bit about it, but it seems like to offer structure and guidance for people, which is really important during this season of summer. Do you want to take a few minutes and talk about that?
Well, yeah, I have really two threads going on there. The Author Alchemist is specifically for writers, and the courses that I offer there are geared toward people who've been in the fan fiction community and are looking for the kind of support that they get there, but in original fiction environment. So I do have courses on how to deal with decision fatigue and overwhelm there. And of course, I have my podcast, The Author Alchemist, which we're actually, and I mentioned this when we were talking earlier this week about how my current one is a series of our deepest fears. And, a lot of that has to do with a lot of the things that we're talking about right now is,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the overwhelm and the two chapter problem and things like that. The other one, which is a newer one, which is what you were talking about, Melody, is called The Task Mistress. And people kind of raise their eyebrows when I mention the name of it, but it's based on my project management experience. What I hope to give people, and especially small business owners and particularly creatives who are building a business around their creativity, a way to manage all the projects that they have going on and all the things that they're trying to do in a way that nourishes them and doesn't overwhelm them with the actual act of trying to manage all the projects that they have going on. So those are things that are really important to me. I think they'll be beneficial to a lot of people, and it's important to me personally, and this gets back to the whole topic of what we're talking about right now, is because I feel like my story from these experiences that I've had as both a novelist and as a project manager in the information technology industry, it will be able to help people share their stories and share their ideas and share their inspiration. And to me, that's just a wonderful feeling. So that's kind of my focus on it.
And I am cheering you on. I
You
have
are.
been over the last couple of weeks, I have been spurring her on in terms of getting this one particular project finished. That I hope that she doesn't know this yet, but I'm gonna encourage her to create a version of it that is specifically for writers. I keep giving her
Ah,
things to do.
she does. She
Oh
does.
my
I like
God.
you've become my project manager. I'm like, oh, I better start taking notes. Oh man. I do, one of the things that was on that we've kind of touched on a little bit on the overwhelm is burnout. And so I wanted to throw it in here, not because we have time to discuss it on this episode, but I believe we're going to be talking about that in the next episode. Um,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
So,
this
Yes.
yeah,
is such a
burnout.
big
Oh.
challenge for writers and people in general right now. Like I don't know a
Mm.
friend that I haven't talked out recently who's just like, I'm fried. I just can't pull ideas out of my head anymore. I'm lucky I eat, sleep, and shower. They're just suffering uh, from burnout, just overwhelm, um, never ending stress, pandemic, political craziness going on. It all adds to the pile. And so this is a really important subject, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it more in our next session.
Yes. Me too. Lot to say there.
Yeah, Gina, particularly you. I know you've been working on. You took July, not necessarily off, but you've stepped back a little bit to recharge and reset. And
Yep.
so I'm very, very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say
Oh, I got a
next
lot
month
to
when you're
say.
not when you're not stepped back anymore. And we also have a worksheet that's going to be going with this episode, right, Melody? I
We
thought that's
do. You can look
okay.
for it on our webpage, aroundthewriterstable.com, and it's going to list some really helpful things about the season of summer. It'll show you what are some balanced and imbalanced qualities. Once you understand that, you can say, "Oh, this is where I'm off, and here's what I can reach of." It's also going to give some uh, ways and questions to think about how you can draw in the qualities and the strengths of the other seasons to help you through the summer process.
Yeah, I'll have it as a download for people on the show notes on our website. If you're listening to this on an app like Spotify or Stitcher, you won't find the worksheet there. But if you go to our website and the show notes for this episode on our website, the worksheet will be downloadable at that location.
And that is aroundthewriterstable.com.
Yes.
Yes, good to mention that. Yes.
And you'll find all of our links there. You'll find a link to my book, Soul of the Seasons, and my plant spirit medicine uh, link on there, and KimBoo's fabulous links for all the goodies she's doing, and Gina's got a link for Women Writing for Change and Women Speak,
Hmm.
and the other work that she does, the very important work she does. So, and I want to invite our listeners again, please write in your comments and questions. We'd love to hear from you. I think we're going to start a Q&A here one of these times to,
That would
um,
be awesome. And just,
yeah,
everybody, that's a form right there on our website, both on the homepage and on the show notes for this episode. You go, you clicky, you type out your question, you hit submit, and we will receive it and be able to respond to it in the next episode. So,
yeah,
simple
we'd
to do.
love to hear your ideas, comments, and questions about burnout for our next
Mm.
thing. So,
Ooh,
Yes.
yeah, that'd be good. Woo.
whew,
So I think that's about it for us. Yeah, it's a little bit longer than our usual episodes, but I think we covered a lot of great territory, and I think we did a great job. So I'm satisfied. I'm happy. I don't know about y'all. We're good. We're good.
We're good. We're good.
We're good. So definitely check us out, and all of our links are on the website aroundthewriterstable.com. The show notes will have the download links. Gina's father's podcast will be there, which I have listened to. It's delightful. So I highly recommend that one. And again, we would love to hear any responses from our listeners about ideas, their thoughts about burnout, anything they got going on that they'd like us discuss specifically, or questions that they might have. So thank you all very much for tuning in and listening to us. And we will catch you next month around the writer's table. Bye, y'all.
Thanks for joining us around the writer's table. Please feel free to suggest a topic or a guest by emailing info@aroundthewriterstable.com. Music provided with gracious permission by Langtree. A link to their music is on our homepage at aroundthewriterstable.com. Everyone here around the writer's table wishes you joy in your writing and everyday grace in your living. Take care until next time.